he has done, along with the government, to try and restart and prompt the restart of the negotiations that sadly broke down with the European Union last week.
Well, of course, Mr Speaker, our security and defence partnership is broad, and the UK entered discussions with the EU on SAFE in good faith, recognising mutual strategic interest and continued commitment. And we were clear with the EU that we were prepared to make a fair financial contribution that reflected the potential for a mutually beneficial relationship and value for the taxpayer. But we've also always said that we won't sign deals unless they're genuinely in the national interest. And in this case, the deal on offer from the EU did not pass that test. But I am absolutely confident that our wider defence and industrial relationships are not affected. In fact, if you look at whether it's the deal on frigates with Norway, whether it's the £8 billion agreement with Turkey for the purchase of 20 Typhoon jets, our joint agreement with Germany on joint export campaigns in relation to boxed armoured vehicles, very much represent the very best of European defence industrial cooperation.
Then Everard.
Well, I know the Minister appreciates the need for the EU and the UK to work very closely together in the face of global security threats and trade challenges. So, in his talks with EU colleagues, will the Minister impress upon them the damage that the proposed EU steel tariffs would do not just to our UK steel industry, but to manufacturing right across the UK and the EU?
Well, Mr Speaker, she has always been a very, very strong advocate for the steel industry, and I can confirm to her we are absolutely committed to defending our steel industry. We're seeking urgent clarification from the Commission on its proposals, and we need to find a bilateral solution, and any EU measures must of course be consistent with the TCA and uphold summit commitments and indeed our Windsor Framework obligations.
Williams.
13, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the UK does not currently deliver direct humanitarian assistance in Pakistan-administered Kashmir or Indian-administered Kashmir, but we continue to monitor the humanitarian situation as we do elsewhere in the region.
Williams.
Stoke-on-Trent is home to one of the largest Kashmiri communities in the UK, and many of my constituents are deeply worried by the continuing restrictions on civil liberties, arbitrary detentions and the ongoing denial of meaningful political determination in Jammu and Kashmir. Will the Minister please set out what specific human rights and self-determination concerns the UK has raised with the Indian government, and what tangible progress my constituents can expect the government to press for?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. We strongly support individuals' rights to freedom of assembly and expression and peaceful political protest. We have consistently emphasised that any human rights violations should be fully investigated in line with international human rights law. We continue to monitor human rights issues and, where we have concerns, raise these with the Government of India.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are repeated claims by community leaders and religious freedom groups that Christians in Kashmir face harassment, social pressure, threats, discrimination, surveillance and sometimes violence. So what steps is the Minister taking in conjunction with international counterparts to support the promotion of faith, especially Christianity, in Kashmir?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, we will always continue to champion the freedom of religion and belief across the world, and he will also know that we consistently raise any human rights violations with governments across the world and will continue to do so.
We come to Topicals Tubby Package.
Come on, sir.
Secretary.
Mr Speaker, can I send my condolences and those of the Government to all those who have lost loved ones in the deadly storms in India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Thailand and Vietnam. Many have lost homes and livelihoods. And I want to praise the emergency responders who have worked tirelessly and are committed to helping those affected, often at great personal risk. In response to requests for support, which we've already received, the UK is providing £675,000 to address immediate humanitarian needs in Sri Lanka and has contributed £800,000 in response to the multiple typhoons that have struck Vietnam. The UK is closely monitoring the situation and stands ready to provide further support as needed.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'll start by associating myself with the Foreign Secretary's comments there. The UK has shown global leadership over many years on international climate
finance, both in terms of the 11.6 billion we provided over the 5 years to 2026, and encouraging other major nations to recognise their responsibility to those nations most in the firing line from climate change. Following last week's budget, can the Foreign Secretary confirm that Britain remains committed to providing that commitment and will include inflation increases?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I can tell my honourable friend that obviously the details were set out as part of the budget for future financial issues, but we will continue to take action around international climate finance and support for dealing with these issues.
Andrew Rosendale, Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, the government buckled under pressure over its lack of consultation with the Chagosian people on the shameful handover of sovereign British territory to Mauritius. So, if this process is genuinely intended to inform policy, what steps will the Minister take to ensure that the views expressed to the Lords Committee are free from external interference? And how will its findings actually inform the government's decision on the future of the Chagos Islands?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman knows that the House of Lords International Relations and Defence Committee are engaging a wide range of Chagosians to ascertain their views on the implications of the treaty and will produce a report before Christmas. And we have seen no evidence of Mauritian interference. It's very important to recognise the wide range of views in the Chagosian community, and I very much look forward to reading the IRDC report when it's completed.
Well,
I hope he's going to check there are actually Chagosians taking part in that consultation, Mr. Speaker, and not outsiders. Anyway, let's try something else. Given last week's report that the Chancellor had a £4 billion surplus rather than the £20 billion deficit, as previously suggested, will the Minister explain why the government is pressing ahead with this eye-watering, expensive £35 billion gift of British sovereign territory to Mauritius? Wouldn't scrapping this atrocious deal be a better way to help the Minister's friend, the Chancellor, restore fiscal credibility and save British taxpayers' money?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no matter how many times he gets up in this place and tries to make wild claims about the cost of this deal, it doesn't make them any more correct. I've been very clear on multiple occasions about the cost of this deal. We will not scrimp when it comes to the national security of this country. This base is crucial for the security of ourselves and our allies, and we've set out the costs very clearly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The freedom to practice or not practice a faith without fear is a fundamental human right. I welcome the government's commitment to promoting this for Christians and other religious communities through the appointment of a UK Special Envoy for Religious Freedom. Will the Minister explain how the FCDO continue to use its diplomatic networks and international partnerships to support all faith and non-faith communities worldwide?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right, and in line with our strategy launched this year, we continue to champion every community's right to worship or not without fear or discrimination. Our Special Envoy works with partners and alongside our diplomatic network to protect this right via multilateral fora and through targeted interventions in key countries to uphold the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion.
Thanks, Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Australia has listed Iran's IRGC as a state sponsor of terrorism. So what discussions have ministers had with their Australian counterparts about matching this important action against terror at home and abroad?
Well, we continue to have many strong conversations with our Five Eyes partners on a range of issues around both state threats and terror threats. He will also know that the government has committed to strengthening the law so that we can have new prescribing tools that can apply to state threats as well as to terrorism threats. And we also take immensely seriously any threat issues to our national security from Iran.
James Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware of the work of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy and other organisations like it, which seek to strengthen democratic governance around the world. But as has been clear today, malign actors all over the world are seeking to erode political systems that promote democracy. Can I ask what the FCDO is doing to help address the global erosion of democracy?
Well, he raises a crucial point, and we work closely with our partners on this issue and support democratic institutions and values, including through the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. We fund election observation, champion media freedom, provide leadership in different forums, and we are going to be setting this as a key priority as incoming co-chair of the Open Government Partnership.
Zoe Franklin.
President Trump is directing increasingly aggressive and lethal military actions against vessels off of Venezuela, actions that experts are warning amount to extrajudicial killings. While the UK has paused some intelligence sharing in response, will the Minister now go further, explicitly condemn these actions and ensure Britain pushes back against this escalation and any further actions outside international law by the Trump administration?
Well, the honourable member will know that we always support international law and the upholding of international law. There have been reports overnight which we don't know the full details of, but the UK is not involved in those operations. More widely, the UK does not accept the legitimacy of the administration put in place by Nicolas Maduro following the 2024 election, and we support a negotiated transition in Venezuela.
Mr. Quidley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent has expressed deep concern for his family and friends in Syria who belong to a minority ethnic group. He is seeking reassurance. What steps is the Secretary of State taking to ensure that all minority communities in Syria are protected?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the important question. We have consistently advocated for an inclusive political transition and underlined the importance of protecting the rights of all Syrians, publicly and in our engagement with the Syrian government. The Foreign Secretary and I were clear on UK expectations for Syria's transition when we met the Syrian Foreign Minister al-Shibani last month. The protection of the rights of all Syrians, wide consultation with Syria's diverse communities on next steps in the transition, and of course, holding perpetrators of violence to account.
Tom Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month I met with Anusha Ashuri and opened his exhibit Surviving Evan at Harrogate District Amnesty International event at Ripon Cathedral. Given the continued use of arbitrary detention and state-sponsored kidnapping and hostage-taking by Iran, what steps is this government taking to strengthen protections for British nationals when abroad?
Mr. Speaker, I am familiar with the case that the honourable member mentions. Indeed, at all the other detention cases in Iran, we are working to ensure that those individuals have full access to consular assistance where they need it, as indeed British nationals do across the world.
Dr. Betty Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we know, our ODA budget is currently reduced to allow defence investment. Given the continuing need to improve global health, not least to guarantee our own health and security, would the Minister meet with myself and other concerned colleagues to discuss how best to continue to protect life-saving health programmes and the work with women and girls, which she has rightly prioritised?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. We will be very happy to meet with her. The UK will continue to centre women and girls in everything that we do internationally, from our diplomacy to our development work. We will mainstream gender across the department's work to ensure we deliver maximum impact. We are retaining our ODA target for gender equality and will share an update on further measures to strengthen our approach to mainstreaming in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There were concerning reports prior to talks last week with leaders of the British Overseas Territories that the government was planning to cave into pressure from the British Virgin Islands, the epicentre of billions of pounds of tax evasion, and allow it to restrict public access to a register of company share ownership. So can the Secretary of State inform the House of the outcome of last week's talks and reassure the British public that the government will force British Overseas Territories to comply with the law and make these registers publicly available?
Minister.
Well, she can find the communiqué online, Mr. Speaker, and the Economic Secretary to the Treasury and I met with the leaders from the Overseas Territories last week at the very successful Joint Ministerial Council. And again, I set out very clearly our expectations on registers of beneficial ownership. But I would point out that all OTs with financial centres have committed to upholding international tax standards, including those on tax transparency and exchange of information, as well as base erosion and profit sharing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the beginning of 2025, OCHA has documented more than 1,600 attacks in the West Bank perpetrated by Israeli settlers. So what more can the UK be doing in terms of sanctions for illegal settler outposts, settlement trade, and to hold the Israeli government to account?
Mr. Speaker, on the 27th of November, the UK, France, Germany and Italy condemned collectively the massive increase in settler violence against Palestinian civilians in the West Bank. The pace of settlement building in the West Bank continues unabated, as my honourable friend knows well, and I know that she has been engaged on these issues for some time. Israel must stop settlement expansion. It must crack down on settler violence, which has reached record levels. This government has introduced 3 waves of sanctions focused on settlements, including against Mr Ben-Gvir.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. In an earlier answer, the Foreign Secretary said that trade relations between China and the UK were of a national interest. To that extent, can I ask what conversations her department had with Invest Northern Ireland prior to it signing a cooperation framework memorandum of understanding with the China Chamber of Commerce in the UK?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, this government supports UK businesses to do business with China whilst being open-eyed to any risks.
Sorry. Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On Donald Trump's threats of military action against oil-rich Venezuela, reports suggest that British military personnel are aboard the US warships heading towards Venezuela. So will the Foreign Secretary therefore make clear that Britain will have no involvement at all, including troops on US warships, in any Trump-led military intervention there?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, as the Foreign Secretary made clear a moment ago, the UK is not involved in these operations. There are reports overnight, which we don't know the full detail, which the US will respond to, and we've been very clear that we expect all nations to operate in line with international law.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Elections Act expanded the franchise to over 3 million British nationals living overseas. As MPs, we have a duty to represent those who lived in our constituencies, but we don't know who they are or where they are. How can our embassies help?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the Foreign Secretary works closely with Cabinet colleagues on a number of issues, including overseas voter registration. We encourage all British nationals to register as overseas voters if they move or live abroad, as has been the approach of successive governments. We keep gov.uk under constant review, and British nationals abroad can contact their local embassy or High Commission for further information.
Debbie Abrahams.
Yes. Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, in 2023, Parliamentarians for Peace was set up in the aftermath of the terror attack in Israel and the killings of innocent Gazan civilians. On International Human Rights Day, next Wednesday, would the Foreign Secretary and her team and everyone here join us for the Parliamentarians for Peace vigil that we're hosting then? Thank you.
Minister.
I will do my very utmost, as I'm sure other ministers will.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Child Nutrition Fund is one of the most effective ways to enhance the impact and value for money of ODA spending by mobilising domestic resources, philanthropic and private capital, having the potential to multiply UK ODA contributions by as much as 6-fold. In 2023, the UK Government committed to a £16 million contribution to the Child Nutrition Fund. Will ministers confirm that that will be honoured despite the changes in ODA spending?
Well, Mr Speaker, he's been a long-standing champion on these issues, and we reaffirmed our commitment to addressing malnutrition at the Nutrition for Growth Summit in 2025, as he knows, and we continue to support the Child Nutrition Fund, which funds treatment of acute malnutrition. We're providing technical assistance, and we're supporting countries to integrate nutrition across sectors.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With winter settling in and thousands of Gazan children still acutely malnourished, will the Right Honourable Friend work with international partners so we can go further and faster to help these children?
I can say yes, we will. That is why we have announced today that we will support the Disaster Emergencies Committee's Middle East appeal through the winter with a pound-for-pound matching, a further £3 million to help support people of Gaza through the winter.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The White House has expressed concerns about sensitive cables that run under Royal Mint Court, as have the Dutch, Swiss and Swedish governments. I understand that the Foreign Office has denied the presence of such cables to the US government, and the Cabinet Office has denied it to the press. So will the Foreign Secretary stand up and just make very clear to the House of Commons that there are no such cables running beneath or near the site, yes or no?
Foreign Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we always make national security considerations the central priority, and we continue to hold a range of discussions on national security issues with the US and with other partners. And I would just say to the honourable member, under his party, the Defence Secretary was sacked for leaking national security information, the Home Secretary was sacked for national security breaches, and they left us with the smallest army since Napoleon. We won't take any lectures from the Conservatives.
Jessica Bourne.
Mr. Speaker, we've seen a year of protests in Georgia against democratic backsliding and crackdowns on political opponents, which are deeply concerning, including for those in Newport with strong links with Kataisi. What more can be done with allies to increase diplomatic pressure?
Minister.
Well, she raises this very, very important issue. We're deeply concerned by the democratic backsliding in Georgia. We've issued a number of sanctions, as she'll be aware, and I've raised concerns directly with Georgian Dream representatives, and will continue to follow the situation closely.
So Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is UAE National Day, marking 54 years since its full independence. In that time, it has become one of our nation's staunchest allies and a key investor benefiting constituencies up and down the country. As chairman of the APPG, will the Foreign Secretary join me in congratulating them and recommitting to this key strategic relationship?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will. I was delighted to see my Emirati counterpart just yesterday. We had a minister representing the British government at the Emirati National Day. They are a key partner. I welcome their investment all over the country, and we will take the relationship from strength to strength.
Jim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In July 2024, the ICJ ruled in its advisory opinion that Israeli settlement and occupation are illegal and needed to be ended and dismantled retrospectively. So can the Minister explain why, after 17 months, the UK government still hasn't responded to the ICJ advisory opinion?
Mr. Speaker, the advisory opinion is an important piece of international legal opinion. We're taking our time and making sure we have an adequate response, but I would just remind my honourable friend that it's not like nothing has happened over the course of that 17 months. We have recognised the Palestinian state. That is absolutely central in the deliberations of the advisory opinion, and we have done many other things too, as has been discussed over the course of the session.
Question, Dr. Ellie Chance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What action will the UK government take as a consequence of Israel's flagrant violation of international law in establishing and expanding settlements? The lack of action creates a culture of impunity in which Israel feels able to greenlight the expansion of the E1 settlement, breaking division between the West Bank and East Jerusalem, putting a nail in the coffin of the two-state solution. Will the Foreign Secretary ban trade with illegal settlements to show that violating international law has consequences?
Mr. Speaker, from this dispatch box, we have announced 3 waves of sanctions, including on Mr. Ben-Gvir and Mr. Smotrich. I have discussed with the Honourable Lady the questions around trade on a number of occasions. Any trade with settlements does not benefit from the trade arrangements in place with Green Line Israel. We continue to take steps to ensure that that regime is being enforced in full, and we continue to look at these issues very carefully.
That completes questions. We'll let the front bench change over. I now call the Justice Secretary, David Lammy.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will make a statement on criminal court reform. As the House is aware, the first part of the independent review of criminal courts was published in July. I'm grateful to its chair, Sir Brian Leveson, one of the foremost judges of his generation, and his expert advisors, Professor David Omeronde, Chris Mayer and Sean McNally. With this review, Sir Brian has produced a blueprint for once-in-a-generation court reform. It's desperately needed, Mr. Speaker, because this government inherited an emergency in our courts. A record of rising backlog, currently at 78,000 cases. Victims facing agonising delays, with some trials not listed for years. All the while, defendants bide their time. the guilty plea rate has decreased every year since the year 2000. And in the year to June, 11,000 cases were dropped after a charge because victims no longer supported or felt they could support the case. Behind the statistics are real people. Katie was repeatedly abused by her partner. She reported him to the police in 2017, but then had an unbearable 6-year wait for justice. During this time, she lost a job due to her mental health deteriorating. She became increasingly isolated, lived in fear, and lost faith in the court system. Mr. Speaker, this is not isolated, it's systemic. We're all proud of our justice system rooted in the Magna Carta, but we must never forget that it implores us not to deny or delay justice. When victims are left waiting for years, justice is effectively denied to them. And this is a betrayal of our legal heritage, and it's a betrayal of the victims themselves. Some will ask why we don't simply increase funding. This government has already invested heavily in the courts, nearly 150 million to make them fit for purpose, 92 million committed per year for criminal legal aid solicitors, and funding for a record number of sitting days in our Crown Courts, 5,000 more than those funded last year by the previous government. Today I can announce up to £34 million per year in additional funding for criminal legal aid advocates to recognise the vital support that they give to those navigating the system. I will also accept Sir Brian's recommendation to match fund a number of pupilages in the criminal area, to open a career at the criminal bar to more young people from across society. I will also negotiate sitting days with the senior judiciary through the usual Concordat process, aiming to give an unprecedented 3-year certainty to the system. I'm clear that sitting days in the Crown Court and Magistrates' Courts must continue to rise, and my ambition is to continue breaking records by the end of this Parliament. But as Sir Brian has made clear, investment is not enough. The caseload is projected to reach 100,000 by 2028, and without fundamental change could keep rising, meaning justice will be denied to more victims and trust in the system will collapse. Mr. Speaker, to avoid that disaster, I will follow Sir Brian's bold blueprint for change. First, I will create new swift courts within the Crown Court with a judge alone deciding verdicts in triable either-way cases with a likely sentence of 3 years or less, as Sir Brian recommends. Sir Brian estimates that they will deliver justice at least 20% faster than jury trials. And whilst jury deliberations remain confidential, judges provide reasoning for their verdicts in open court. So this will hardwire transparency into our new approach. Sir Brian also proposes restricting defendants' right to elect for jury trials, a practice not found widely in other common law jurisdictions. And let's be honest, it's a peculiar way to run a public service. Our world-leading judges should hear the most serious cases, and I agree that they and the magistrate should decide where a case is heard. This will prevent defendants from gaming the system, choosing whichever court they think gives the best chance of success and drawing out the process, hoping victims give up. And I will limit appeals from the Magistrates' Court so that they are only allowed on points of law to prevent justice being delayed further. Alongside these changes, we will increase Magistrates' Court sentencing powers to 18 months. So they can take a greater proportion of lower-level offending and relieve pressure on the Crown Court. I will also take power to extend that to 2 years, should it become necessary to leave further pressure. And when it comes to exceptionally technical and lengthy fraud and financial trials, judges will be able to sit without a jury where appropriate. While these cases are small in number, they place undue pressures on jurors to sit for months, a significant interference with their personal and professional lives. These reforms are bold, Mr. Speaker, but they're necessary. I'm clear that jury trials will continue to be the cornerstone of the system for the most serious offences, those likely to receive a sentence over 3 years and all indictable-only offences. Among others, this will include rape, murder, manslaughter, grievous bodily harm, robbery and arson with intent to kill. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to clear up some misconceptions that colleagues unfamiliar in this area might hold. In England and Wales, magistrates have long done the vast majority of criminal cases. That was true in the Victorian era, it's right through to Winston Churchill's time, and today magistrates hear about 90% of criminal cases. In fact, only 3% of trial cases in England and Wales will ever go before a jury, and almost 3/4 of all trials going to the Crown Court will continue to be heard by them under our changes. The party opposite talk about the Crown Court as if it were an ancient institution. I should remind them that it was established in 1971, the year before I was born, to replace a patchwork of part-time courts unable to cope with the rising caseload. Parliament acted because the country needed a more efficient system that could command public confidence. We now face an emergency in the courts, and we must act. As Lord Chancellor, my responsibility is to ground reform in the rule of law and the right to a fair trial. We will ensure cases are dealt with at the right level, proportionate to their severity, and deliver the swifter justice victims deserve. I'm also clear that we must future-proof our approach. Technology is changing almost every aspect of our lives, and the courts can be no exception. This means that we must modernise, Mr. Speaker. We have asked Sir Brian to write a second report focused on efficiency and how we can make much better use of technology to deliver the modern and effective courts the public rightly expect. Mr. Speaker, we'll also continue to support victims to make sure that they have the confidence to come forward and see justice through to its conclusion. I announced this week that I will provide multi-year funding for victim support services, including specialist emotional and practical support for victims of domestic violence and domestic abuse, and increase budgets to reflect rising costs. And this will give providers a certainty to plan for the next 3 years. And it amounts to a total investment, a record investment in victims of £550 million, more than £500 million. I want those victims to stay the course. Finally, we must also be honest that this is a problem that has taken years to build up. It will take years to fix. The changes I'm proposing will require legislation that will take time to implement. Our investment will also need time to have an effect. But we are pulling every possible lever to move in a positive direction, and my ambition for the backlog to start coming down by the end of this Parliament remains. And I commend this statement to the House.
Yeah. We now come to Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenner.
Well, I'm glad to see that the Justice Secretary has finally come into work today. When 12 prisoners were mistakenly released after the introduction of his brilliant new checks, he didn't bother to come to Parliament to inform the country. Then when I asked his department whether it's paying compensation to terrorists in prison, he didn't show up. And when the news of his plans to scrap jury trials mysteriously emerged in the press last week, he was nowhere to be seen. Like the prisoners under his watch, he's been a man on the run, the Lammy Dodger of this sorry charade for a government. But now today we are blessed with his presence, and his past is catching up with him, because the best opponent of the Justice Secretary's plans to curb jury trials is the Justice Secretary himself. In 2020, he said, "Criminal trials without juries are a bad idea. You don't fix the backlog with trials that are widely perceived as unfair." In 2017, in his report into prejudice in the criminal justice system, he found juries, and I quote, "act as a filter for prejudice." But now he's become Justice Secretary, he's scrapping the very institution he once lauded. Which is it? Will the real David Lammy please stand up? And it isn't just him. Who can guess which Labour MP said taking away jury trials would be a wholly draconian act? It's his junior minister. And what about this? There should be a right to trial by jury in all criminal cases. Any ideas, Mr. Speaker? Who else? It's the Prime Minister this time. does this government have no shame? Now, yesterday the Justice Secretary boldly claimed that if the medieval barons were around today, they'd support his changes. Well, then again, English history has never been his specialist subject, has it? 800 years on from the Magna Carta, we have another unpopular leader who doesn't listen to his subjects, levies eye-watering taxes, and a state that locks people up for what they say. Well, I say, the link between British citizens and the administration of justice is as important as ever. A link that serves as a check on an occasionally overbearing state. Our ancestors did not stop bad King John, only to be undone 800 years later by this Prime Minister and his court jester. And all of this because the Justice Secretary can't manage his own department. This morning, more than 50 Crown courtrooms sit empty in England alone.
Can I just gently say, I wanted, quite rightly, the Justice Secretary to be heard without comment from the front benches, so I certainly expect the same in return. Do we understand?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, more than 50 Crown courtrooms sit empty in England alone. In fact, over 21,000 court days have gone unused this year. And why? Not because there are too many juries, but because the Justice Secretary won't fund the sitting days. Had he done so, the backlog would have shrunk by up to 10,000 cases rather than the fact it's risen this year. The truth is, scrapping juries is a choice. This government could find the money to bear down on the backlog of asylum claims. It could find the money to spend more on benefits, just not to fund the courts to sit round the clock. Last year, the entire budget for courts and legal aid was £5.5 billion. Almost exactly the same amount of money, £5.4 billion, that we spent on illegal migrants. He defends their rights under the ECHR, but not our rights under Magna Carta. And for what? He can't even guarantee that in 4 years' time, this will reduce the backlog. With this Justice Secretary, it is justice delayed and justice denied. So I ask him, much of the rest of the package announced today is sensible, but why has it taken 17 months? The Bar Council, the Law Society, the Criminal Bar Association have all said that jury trials are not the problem.
You're facing the wrong way. It's very hard when you're looking at the doors. Thank you.
Just, Mr. Speaker. So why did he not start by reforming the probation service, the court listings, and tackling delays from late prison transfers? Why has he still not taken up the Lady Chief Justice on all the sitting days she's offered him? And lastly, why on earth does this Justice Secretary think he has a mandate to rip up centuries of jury trials without even a mention of it in his party's manifesto? In his twisted logic, he says he's scrapping juries to save them. But be in no doubt, if the Justice Secretary gets away with this, is the beginning of the end of jury trials. He's already in retreat. Let's unite to send him packing for good.
Justice Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Shadow Justice Secretary, and I am a little surprised that in his tirade he never once mentioned victims. Not once. Not once in his clip did he talk about the people waiting in that backlog. He's boasted about himself as an armchair historian. Can I just give him a history lesson, Mr. Speaker? In 2019, sitting days in the Crown Court were cut by almost 15%. They oversaw a 12% reduction in Crown Court trials. And many of us remember, over those 14 years of austerity, the magistrates' courts that closed in local communities, the Crown courts that closed in local communities under his watch. It was a political decision, not my words, the words of the senior presiding judge of England and Wales, I wonder how he'll try to blame the pandemic for that decision. He talks about what I tweeted in 2020. We are saving and protecting jury trials. Jury trials will continue. He talks about trial by jury as if we live in the United States. 90% of criminal trials, 1.3 million, are done by our magistrate in this country, which has existed for 650 years, and we are going to grow our magistrates who we believe could do more. He talks about the Magna Carta. Yes, Article 9 establishes the jury trial, which we are proud of, and 39 establishes the jury trial, and it establishes a fair trial. But he knows too that Article 40 asks us not to delay justice, and that is the substance of this debate, and that is why we need reform. He knows too that the Conservatives took juries away from defamation cases in 2013. Back in 1933, we had juries sitting in civil cases. So of course we reform. We reform to meet the needs of the system. He knows also that because of DNA evidence, because of CCTV, for a whole raft of reasons, police arresting 10% more, we have a demand issue. We must meet that challenge, and we must ensure that we put the victim at the centre of our criminal justice system. That's who it's there for, and it's why he should have mentioned them.
Andy Slaughter, Chair of the Justice Committee.
Mr. Speaker, can I first recognise the commitment of the Lord Chancellor and the Minister of State in grasping the issue of the Crown Court backlog, which, as Sir Brian Leveson says, is a threat to our whole system of criminal justice. The criticism of these proposals from the opposition benches comes with no solution whatsoever. Can I also acknowledge his decision to stay within the limits proposed by Sir Brian for cases which in the future will be tried without a jury. Nonetheless, these are profound changes to the criminal justice system, which not only restrict the role of juries, but substantially extend the powers of magistrates and judges sitting alone. Will he therefore evaluate the effects of these changes to see whether they, along with other measures such as increased investment, bring down the backlog, and whether they do so fairly, without bias, and without increasing conviction rates or sentence length? And if they do not deliver on all these points, will he think again?
Justice Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for all of his work in these areas. And yes, I can commit to that evaluation, which is, of course, very important indeed. And it's right to say, too, that Sir Brian found in his report, or estimated that he suspected that there would be 20% faster, because, of course, it does take time for juries to deliberate, and without the necessary conveyance of information between barristers, the judge and the jury, he expects a system that's judge-led, or indeed that's magistrate-led, to be speedier. He will know too that the Magistrates' Court don't currently have a backlog, and with increasing magistrates can do a little more.
Jess Brownfield, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The announcement today of the government's plan to reduce the use of trial by jury would be an historic upheaval of our court system with profound consequences. But the Justice Secretary has not stood up and argued in favour of judge-only trials on their own terms. Instead, he has made arguments that there is no alternative. That is simply not true. We have heard many within the legal profession argue that removing trial by jury is a misdirection for the multitude of problems that are actually underlying the backlog. These problems, caused by years of Conservative mismanagement, have resulted in countless wasted hours of sitting times, and victims failed time and time again. Perhaps the defendant does not arrive in court due to the broken private contracts. There is no interpreter. Maybe the witness care unit forgets to tell witnesses to attend, or key evidence isn't served until the day of trial, so the defence has no time to consider it, or there's not enough court staff to manage the security on the door and the trial trial runs late, or our crumbling court infrastructure results in no running water, a broken lift, even flooded courtrooms. So we do need a real solution to tackle these issues which plague our justice system. But instead, the Justice Secretary intends to remove a huge number of jury trials despite his own previous opposition. All while the Ministry of Justice capital budget is being cut by 3% in real terms every year. So while I absolutely welcome the £500 million investment in victims and witness support over 3 years, the total courts maintenance backlog is estimated at £1.3 billion. So can I ask the Justice Secretary, where is the investment to fix the collapsing infrastructure in the justice system? And will he consider reopening many of the Crown Courts closed under the Conservatives, including mine in Chichester? And as he confirmed to the media today, an entire jury's worth of prisoners have been released in error in recent weeks. Does the Secretary of State have confidence in his department to oversee such an extreme and radical reform when they're not even getting the basics right?
Justice Secretary.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady. She mentions a range of issues which are important to ensure that across our 80 or so courts and 500 courtrooms that they're working effectively, and that's why we've asked Sir Brian Leveson to look at efficiency as part 2 of his review, because we do need not just our courts but Crown prosecution, our police working together at a regional level to deliver that improvement. I would just say to her that when we're thinking about those either way cases, I do think it's legitimate for the government to take a view on, for example, whether a driving licence fraud or fly tipping or the theft of a bike requires a jury trial, which will last 2 days, let's say, or actually it can be dealt with by a magistrate or by a judge. And I know that she is committed to us bearing down and dealing with violence against women and girls. And it can't be right that if you're charged with an offence like the theft of a bicycle, theft from a vehicle, theft from an employee, that you can opt for a trial, and by necessity that goes into the system and will delay a rape trial, a murder trial or something else. That's the balance of decision that I've sought to make, and I think it's why the government has made the right decision, implemented Sir Brian's reforms.
Dame Diana, Mother of the House.
Yeah. The entire House is concerned about victims, including attacks on women and girls. But the entire House is also concerned about the men and women who will undoubtedly suffer miscarriages of justice if the right to trial by jury is curtailed. And I would quote from a lawyer: "The right to trial by jury is an important factor in the delicate balance between the power of the state and the freedom of the individual. The further it is restricted, the greater the imbalance." That lawyer is our current Prime Minister. He wrote that in 1992. It was as true then as it is true today. How can the Chancellor stand up and propose a limitation of the right to trial by jury when he knows perfectly well the category of defendant who will suffer the ill effects of that?
Justice Secretary.
Can I say I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and I'm hugely grateful for her expertise in these areas. She will know that for lots of reasons to do with poverty particularly, many women are affected by by criminal cases that don't actually command a sentence of much more than 12 months. Actually, the vast majority of crimes committed by women are dealt with by magistrates. And it's my judgment that they could do more. And I do say, in keeping in mind the victims particularly, It cannot be right. It cannot be right that we're asking women to wait. That in a city like London, if you are raped tomorrow, the listing will not be until 2028 or 2029. If you're centering those victims, and it's why I think the Victims Commissioner is supporting these changes, it is because we are putting those women first. I'd also remind her of the 550 million that I'm dedicating to victim support to support those very women she talks about.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the government deserves credit for taking seriously a serious report into a serious problem. But can I ask the Secretary of State whether it is his preference that the changes he's outlined to jury trial are permanent or will recede when the problem of backlogs recedes? Can I also ask him, in relation to judges alone deciding either way cases, he knows that Sir Brian's recommendation is that the presumption should be that for cases where the sentence may be 3 years or less, that it should be a judge-only trial, but that, of course, is a presumption that could be rebutted. Is it the government's intention that that should be a presumption, not a definitive rule? And finally, he knows that Sir Brian also recommended that the plea hearings be pushed back to allow for advice on guilty pleas to be given more clearly and more fully, and that is likely to increase the number of guilty pleas, preventing cracked trials. In what he's said about extra funding for the criminal bar, will he focus that funding so that people can be advised early and we can avoid those cracked trials?
Justice Secretary.
Well, we will consult on how we implement that so we can deal with those cracked trials. I'm pleased that he recognises the importance of Sir Brian's work and his deliberations with his panel, it is not my expectation that these rules would change, and that's also because Sir Brian reflected on the complexity and the demand that we're seeing in our criminal justice system. I know, with his tremendous experience, DNA evidence, phenotyping, the range of new laws that this Parliament is introducing, the increase in sexual crimes as a result of smartphones and other technology, all of that requires change in the system. So I do believe the changes that we are making will be permanent.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that my right honourable friend has inherited a disastrous situation in the criminal justice system. Huge backlog left by austerity from the party opposite, so we have no truck with them. But does he fear, as I do, that restricting trial by jury will put a certain class of people in judgment over the rest of us, and that the check and balance on that is that jury can be drawn from amongst what we might include working class people, as I would describe them? Does he fear that we're going to create an us and them in the criminal justice system by taking away people's right to go to trial by jury?
Justice Secretary.
I do understand my honourable friend's anxiety, of course I do, but I would just remind him, Mr. Speaker, that the vast majority of these individuals will be tried by magistrates, and that historic system that we have is actually an aspect of that Article 39 Magna Carta right which is being tried by your peers, because they are people that live in every neighbourhood in our country and volunteer their efforts very importantly.
Sir David.
The Secretary of State, when he took office, swore an oath of office. It reads, "I do swear that I will respect the rule of law, defend the independence of the judiciary, and discharge my duty to ensure the provision of resources for the efficient and effective support of the courts." And that last bit matters. Governments of his party, my party, and before they get too sanctimonious, the Liberal Democrats too,
Oh, surely not.
all starved the courts, all of them, from Blair to now. And what he has to do is put that right, because if he doesn't get sufficient extra sitting days, this problem will not be solved. And when I say sufficient extra, it's not 1,000, it's not even 5,000. It's an order of magnitude increase, because instead what he's doing is undermining a bulwark of our Constitution. In the words of Lord Denning, it's been the bulwark of our liberties for too long for any of us to seek to alter it. So why won't he go and have his argument with the Treasury and solve this problem properly?
Justice Secretary.
I do understand the spirit of what the right honourable gentleman is saying, and he's right. Our courts have been starved of funds for too long. But he knows, despite the extra investment that we're putting in and the investment that we got in the spending review, new courts at places like Blackpool, it will take a considerable time. And I say to him, when we've asked Sir Brian to reflect, and he is one of our most eminent judges, would it really be right to ask the victims to wait a decade until we fix the system? It can't be. For all of the reasons that he reflects on in his report, we have got to chuck everything at it. More investment, which we are doing, reform, which we are doing, modernisation, which we're doing.
Which we got Dr. Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Any of us who have supported a constituent who is in a rape trial will take no lectures from the benches opposite about how they managed our courts. There is clearly a challenge here. I think the worry for many of us is whether the Justice Secretary's own prescription is the solution, because as he points out, juries are involved in less than 3% of all criminal cases. So it is difficult to see how this measure, with all the challenges that it may bring for justice and fairness, particularly for some of our minority communities, will address that backlog. Lord Leveson himself pointed out increasing sitting days wouldn't be a solution unless we had the barristers as solicitors. So can he make a guarantee that there will be the funding for the legal aid that is required to ensure that every defendant has decent representation?
Justice Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, and I just remind her that we are increasing that uplift to barristers and their fees, 34 million. We've also increased legal aid, 92 million for our solicitors, and because we do need a pipeline of criminal lawyers, we've got this match-funded scheme for pupilages, so that we do see the next generation of young people from all backgrounds becoming our criminal legal aid lawyers.
Speaker, juries are not the cause of the court backlog. If they were, we would not see similar extended delays in the magistrates' courts, which have a record backlog of 361,000 cases. The cause is not just pupilages, but also legal advisers in the magistrates' courts. Given that some of these cases with potential longer sentences will move to the magistrates' court, what additional investment will go into them so that we don't just see the problem move from the Crown Court to the Magistrates' Court and see victims wait just as long there?
Justice Secretary.
I say that's why we're putting money into legal advisers. That's why we're growing the magistracy. There isn't anything like the backlog in our magistrates' courts that exists in our Crown Courts. So the question is, should we leave it as a year, or could our magistrates do more? And I think 18 months in terms of the sentencing threshold is right.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I need to be honest. The prospect of citizens in our country being put away in jail for up to 3 years without the benefits of a trial by jury sends a chill through my heart. I'd also gently say that no government should ever govern as if it will be in power forever. The front bench denounce members of Reform as being Putin's pals. I think that's a fair description. Doesn't the Justice Secretary want to think again because what would we imagine if Putin's pals, as described in government in this country, where people get put away for 3 years without trial by jury, how would they use this? And isn't that a frightening prospect when we make these changes under pressure and hand these changes on to forces which I think will take things even further? Doesn't that concern the Justice Secretary?
Justice Secretary.
I would just say to the Honourable Gentleman that clearly I think he would accept that justice isn't being served now. And I simply would not equate either our magistrates or our independent judiciary to anything like what we see under Putin's Russia.
Dr. Neil Shasrihas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Nobody would disagree with the Lord Chancellor's diagnosis. The criminal courts are in crisis. It's the treatment that is in dispute. And the question is whether the watering down of jury trials will be the solution, when in fact it's a lack of judges, it's a lack of court space, it's a lack of infrastructure and inefficiencies in the system, and crucially it is a lack of appropriately trained defence and prosecution counsel who can deal with the complexities of these cases. Is this not a case, Mr Speaker, where the government have chosen to prioritise other areas of spending, such as welfare, over our court system?
Justice Secretary.
I just say to him that his party didn't come up with any solutions and the backlog continued to rise. We commissioned an independent review led by one of the country's most eminent judges, and we are now, having reflected on that review, getting on with the business of recognising what he said, which is there is not a silver bullet, we have to do it all, and we are building on the reform he asked us to do.
Mike Donald.
Can I welcome the additional money for the criminal aid advocates and also more pupillage? But if we are to rely more upon single judges and often sitting in alone, is there a need for greater transparency with regard to the selection of those judges, even to the point of individual selection on individual cases? I've written to the Secretary of State this morning on behalf of a number of our members about a particular instance of a disappearance of a judge. I'd be grateful if you could read that letter, and possibly we could meet with a group of MPs concerned about this matter.
I will read that letter and commit to myself for the Minister of State meeting with him and the MPs. And he's absolutely right. Transparency is core. And when I looked at this in the Lammy review, I was very concerned that too often what happened in our Magistrates' Court, what happened in our Crown Court, there were not the transcript, it was not easy. And that is absolutely part of what we are now investing in, particularly with AI as technology, and we will be coming forward with.
Liz Sutherland.
I rise as the co-chair of the Justice Union's parliamentary group. Carnarvon Justice Centre is only 16 years old, but the roof leaks when it's raining and the heating doesn't work. So I'll list some of the root causes why criminal courts are processing fewer cases. High workloads, staff shortages and inexperience, poor administration, crumbling buildings. So how does he think that undermining one of the basic tenets of English and Welsh law is going to be a solution to those problems?
Justice Secretary.
Well, can I refer her to paragraph 9 of Sir Brian's review, where it says, it is important to underline that greater financial investment on its own, without systemic reform, cannot solve the crisis. We are investing. It will take time. It's not fair to ask victims to wait.
Lindsay Farnell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I spent 2 decades working on the front line in the criminal justice system, and I can tell you now, this is a crisis that has been building for years and years and years. I spoke to one of my former colleagues today to ask him how things are, and he said something has to be done. The backlog and delay is distorting the justice system, and people need to wait so long for justice that defendants are pleading not guilty in the hope that the case ends up being considered not in the public interest. Meanwhile, the public, victims and witnesses pay the price. Justice delayed is justice denied. My former colleague is there right now working on the front line in the criminal justice system. So let's support those people working on the criminal justice system, and let's support our victims of crime so that they get justice quickly and fairly. And please be bold is my request to the Minister, and thank you.
Justice Secretary.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady who puts her remarks so well. Let us be clear that there are defendants gaming and playing the system. And if we continue to allow them to do that, it is victims, vulnerable victims, who pay the price in the most serious offences in our country. That is why it is not just about financial investment. It has to be about reform. And I'm determined to see this through. Very grateful.
Sir Ashley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Sir Brian Leveson made a number of recommendations in his report to reduce the Crown Court backlog, many of which are welcome, but curtailing the right to a jury trial is not one of them. So will he instruct his department to publish the modelling they will have undertaken, so we can see how much effect
each individual recommendation will have in tackling the backlog, so this House can take a view on its efficacy before we vote on his legislation.
I cannot take that there will be an impact assessment at the point of legislation, of course.
And Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The governance of jury trials has changed quite considerably over time, dramatically so in the 19th century and again in the 1970s. In both cases, in order to enhance and improve public access to justice. Would the Lord Chancellor agree with me that if our traditions, including our legal traditions, are to endure, they need to adapt?
Yes, Secretary.
She's absolutely right. Demand is soaring. We're asking our police to arrest more, quite rightly. All of us know. Smartphones, DNA, phenotyping so that you can tell if someone's got what the colour of their eye is, all of this stuff increases the workload. We have to reform the system or we will break it.
Ray Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Justice delayed is indeed justice denied, but we have a proud history of juries in this country. So if juries are to be suspended for cases where less than 3 years, 3-year sentence is expected to clear the backlog, will this just be for a limited time? And when will normal jury service be resumed? Thank you.
For the reason of complexity that Sir Brian sets out, and because actually passing legislation means that we can only see the numbers starting to fall, I think, by the next general election. No, this change has to be permanent.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Bar Council has said it has seen no evidence that removing the right to elect a jury trial will significantly reduce the Crown Court backlog, and both the Bar Council and the Criminal Bar Association state that the real cause of delays is years of underfunding and reduced sitting days, can the Minister explain why the Government is pursuing the removal of jury trials without publishing any modelling to show that juries, rather than chronic under-resourcing, are responsible for backlogs? Will the Minister release the evidence base underpinning this proposed reform? Impact assessments after the reform is made will be too late.
Justice Secretary.
Can I just ask my honourable friend, who I know has tremendous expertise in these areas, the evidence is here in a very, very lengthy report and review that looks at all the issues, says it's likely that the new division within the Crown Court and changes to the Magistrate Court will lead to a 20% speed up of the process.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the idea that you have to scrap jury trials to save jury trials is simply farcical. 800 years of legal frameworks are being upended, not to save backlogs, it's not to save money, there's a reframing of rights and where power lies, taking power away from the people. Does the Lord Chancellor agree? Does he accept that jury trials, having your peers judge you, it protects the vulnerable and enables fairness? And in fact, this decision, as the Mother of the House said, will actually increase the risk of miscarriages of justice.
Justice Secretary.
I say to the honourable gentleman, our criminal law cannot just be set in aspic. The system that we have now largely came about as a result of legislation in 1971. Just prior to that, this House outlawed homosexuality. It was only in 1991 that we outlawed marital rape. So of course we make change, and it's right that we make change in this circumstance.
Sir Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have immense sympathy for the difficult position that the Lord Chancellor is in and that the many victims of crime in our country are in. There are, however, a category of offences relating to the right to protest, and the right to protest has been restricted by multiple governments over time. It is very important that we maintain the involvement of jury trials within anything touching on that area. Can the Lord Chancellor commit to retaining jury trials where either the current offence potential imprisonment would be such that at the moment it would be an either way offence, or where they're currently explicitly either way? Sorry, would currently go to the Crown Court or where they would be either way?
Justice Secretary.
Well, I recognise that in that category of those who are sentenced to beyond 18 months that would now sit with the magistrates and up to 3 years. There will be a range of cases, but I do believe that determination now must be left to our magistrates and judiciary to make that appropriate determination.
On Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are supposed to have a legal system in which we're proud of, and the purpose of jury service is to ensure a fair and impartial justice system. Whilst there are dire backlogs in terms of Crown Court hearings in England and delays too in Northern Ireland, would the Lord Chancellor consider other options such as a full funding of resources to address backlogs as opposed to removing a civic obligation that people in this country believe in and have upheld for a fair judicial system?
Secretary.
Well, can I say to the Right Honourable Lady that the evidence is here, this is an independent review, and I just read her what Sir Brian says once again. It's important to underline that greater financial investment on its own, without systemic reform, cannot solve this crisis.
Nadia Whitty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I firstly welcome the £550 million investment in victims. But a trial by jury of your peers is a cornerstone of the criminal justice system in this country. Court backlogs are a serious problem. I know that firsthand. But the evidence shows that this is because of issues like a chronic lack of funding rather than the use of juries. Surely the Secretary of State can see that it would be a grave error to erode a principle that has stood the test of hundreds of years, that is widely regarded as producing the fairest outcomes, including by his own 2017 review, all for time and cost-saving measures that might in practice save neither time nor cost.
Justice Secretary.
Well, I recognise the sincerity with which the Honourable Lady, my honourable friend, puts her remarks, but I would say to her that I really reflected on what Sir Brian said. There is no silver bullet here. I do not suggest that the changes we're making to threshold in relation to jury trial will fix this entire problem. It will take more investment, that's what we're doing. It will take modernisation, particularly in relation to transcript and audio, but it will also take reform. And we have reformed the criminal justice system in the past. We can do that again in a way that is fair and right for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the event a volunteer magistrate makes a mistake and jails someone for 2 years, now that person's automatic right to a rehearing is removed, can the Justice Secretary confirm whether he believes this is efficiency or just easier wrongful imprisonment?
Justice Secretary.
Of course you would get permission to appeal where the circumstances are legally correct. Of course you would.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the proposals being made to tackle the court backlogs and the delays, and the previous government did nothing to address this. But can the Secretary of State please confirm that this government will preserve the sanctity of jury trials, but the changes relate to only some of either way offences, which are considered to be less serious and can therefore be properly dealt with by magistrates who already deal with 90% of criminal cases?
Justice
Yes, I can. Very grateful. And I'd want to confirm, for every victim of a crime, it's serious. But the decisions that I'm making from the dispatch box are about length of sentence, asking our magistrates to go up from 1 year to 18 months, and asking this new division within the Crown Court to deal with 18 months to 3 years.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State not agree that his policy to abolish trial by jury in all but the most serious of cases undermines the whole foundation of law and order in this country and risks the further politicisation of our judicial system, with judges acting alone as the state and no longer being held to account by the people in the form of a jury?
Secretary of State.
No, I do not.
Catherine Atkinson.
Thank you, Deputy Madam Speaker. Victims are waiting for years to be able to see their cases go to trial. Christmas after Christmas, unable to heal or move on. the backlog at a record 78,000 cases, and a backlog that was growing under the Conservative government before the COVID pandemic. Does the Secretary of State find it as galling as I do, the hypocrisy and faux outrage of the Conservative opposition, that reform is needed to clear up the mess they made of our criminal justice system? Secretary of State.
She puts it very well, and as I said, I was worried that the Shadow Justice Secretary did not mention victims at all in his statement. He did not talk about their record in office. There's been a lot said about further investment, but effectively behind those questions is that we should ask victims to wait another decade while that investment. I don't think we can do that.
Sian Berry.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I appreciate the focus on victims, but has the Secretary of State considered the risks of removing juries with, where there are charges with state or corporate victims if we are to preserve dissent, whistleblowing and protest? And given big concerns raised about representation among judges, is he concerned about the potential for really damaging a tax on and politicisation of individual judges and their decisions?
We have got to protect our judges, and there is an increased climate in which judges are concerned about their security because of statements, some of them from this House, that would undermine the independence of our judiciary.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The proposed new SWIFT courts will mean decisions regarding guilt will be made by judges alone, who have had sight of inadmissible and potential prejudicial evidence. So, can the Secretary of State give assurances that judges' decisions are not influenced by inadmissible evidence, bearing in mind the significant consequences for both victims and defendants involved in cases no longer eligible for jury trials? And if this policy goes ahead, will he consider a non-extendable sunset clause?
I'm very grateful for the question, and I will reflect on the evidence point that my honourable friend makes. I've said that I don't believe that a sunset clause would be right in this area because of the demand and the complexity that Sir Brian also refers to, and frankly because legislation will take some time. I hope to see the backlog reducing by the next election, but I do believe these changes have to be permanent.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Tony Blair's administration brought in similar proposals and was eventually forced to abandon them thanks to opposition both within this House and beyond. The same appears to be, a coalition of opposition appears to be building up yet again. Reflecting on the reply that the Justice Secretary has just given, could I urge him to reconsider the sunset clause as being the only way that he might actually get this proposals through the House?
Well, can I just say to the honourable gentleman, you know, when I had come out of practising at the beginning of the Tony Blair period, the cases were not anywhere near what they are today. There wasn't a backlog. I mean, cases could come on within a year, so very, very different circumstances. And we did not commission a lengthy review to look at all of these issues in the way that we have today. So it's a vastly, vastly different set of circumstances.
Harpreet Upal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In September, I attended a roundtable meeting with CSE survivors, which was hosted by the Mayor of West Yorkshire. And one of the key issues they raised was the delays that they are facing in court proceedings. It is unacceptable that perpetrators aren't being brought to justice more quickly. So can I welcome these reforms, but can the Justice Secretary set out how we will make sure that those court delays are reduced as much as possible and that perpetrators are brought to justice as quickly as possible?
Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and she's absolutely right that it's in implementing those recommendations, it's in moving, I hope, to legislation as soon as we can. The continued investment in the court system is important. The Concordat and my obligation to get to more sitting days is of course important. Modernisation and the use of AI and technology across our court system and modernising our courts is very important. And of course this is, you know, the discussion today is about our criminal court, but we also need investment in our civil courts. and our family courts as well.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I begin by firstly making reference to marriage to interest as a practising barrister and a law firm owner. Our centuries-old right to jury trial is not an ornament of the past. It is the living example of a fair trial, the safeguard that ensures no citizen is judged except by their peers. It is the cornerstone of our legal heritage and the bedrock of public confidence in criminal justice. It must not be curtailed for administrative convenience. And let us be clear, curtailing jury trials won't cut the backlog. And if it does, it will simply shift that backlog straight back into the appeal courts. So why has the government chosen not to prioritise court capacity, judicial recruitment and proper case management reform, but instead chosen to curtail jury trials?
We're doing all of it, I would say, and I have huge respect for the Honourable Gentleman and his experience as a criminal practitioner. And let me say, of course, I've heard a lot of messages over the last few days from friends of mine that are at the bar or are criminal legal aid solicitors. Change is hard, but the responsibility of the government is to look at the whole system, to look at all that has been said, and to centre victims. And I'm not hearing, really, from the Chamber, for those who oppose what we're doing, what else? What I am hearing is more money might fix this problem, Well, Sir Brian's been clear, investment alone will not fix this problem, and it's not acceptable to ask victims to wait another decade for that investment to kick in.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the government that the government will match fund criminal barrister pupilages and agree there should be a focus on opening up a career at the criminal bar to even more young people from across society, and I'd say from across socio-economic backgrounds. Can the Lord Chancellor set out what additional plans he has to make law a more accessible sector for young people of all backgrounds?
Secretary of State.
The day I was called to the bar back in the mid-1990s was a huge moment in my life, coming from a working class poorer background, raised by a single mother. And I'm deeply saddened that over the last few years, young people from all backgrounds have been put off becoming criminal legal aid solicitors, criminal legal aid barristers. We've got to do something about it. And that's why I've found the money, both to raise fees for our barristers and our lawyers in this area, but also to ensure that we've got the next generation of lawyers coming through. And I hope it doesn't get lost in some of the misconception about jury trials.
Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Justice Secretary blames the court backlog on reduction in funding by the previous government, yet he plans to reduce access to jury trials permanently. Isn't the truth of it he doesn't want to fund courts because his government has prioritised welfare for the few over justice for the many?
No, absolutely not. We are implementing and building on the work of Sir Brian Leveson. We are determined to bring this down. It does take investment, it does take reform, it does take modernisation.
Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Lord Chancellor for his statement here today. Residents in my constituent Harlow are rightly concerned about the court backlog. Waiting 6 years for justice is not justice. Can the Lord Chancellor confirm that these changes they will bring down the court backlog, and can he reassure us that actually those major crimes that he spoke about will still face a trial by jury?
Secretary of State.
I can confirm that the jury system remains the cornerstone of our system and must do for obvious reasons. I do want to see the backlog coming down, but this is a mountain to climb, and that's why I've said I want to see reductions by the next general election. But the trend at the moment is upwards, and that's why we've got to throw everything at it if we're going to solve this problem.
Will Foster.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've previously raised the case of my Woking constituent, Danny, who is a victim of grooming and sexual abuse. She is having to wait more than 6 years for justice. Although I am concerned about these proposals from the Justice Secretary, I and others can probably be convinced if they do genuinely put victims first without undermining our justice system. So to do that, to persuade me, please will the Justice Secretary agree to publish the impact assessment in full and let the Select Committee for the Justice team fully scrutinise these proposals before the bill is introduced?
Well, as you would expect, of course there'll be an impact assessment at the point of legislation and the full scrutiny of these proposals, both at this place and in the other place. I would just say to him, listen to victim voices today. Listen to our victim commissioners. Listen to those groups that support victims. They are supporting these proposals because they know that combined, not just unilaterally, but combined, they are the best attempt that we've got to recalibrate and bring the system back to where it should be.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Justice has devolved to Northern Ireland with the exception of the regulation of non-jury trials. On the 9th of June, a Northern Ireland minister in a committee of this place on the extension of non-jury trials in Northern Ireland actually said, the Secretary of State has asked officials over the next 2 years to examine how Northern Ireland could move away from those provisions, being non-jury trials. Is that still the government's mind?
Secretary of State.
Well, Northern Ireland, of course, is in a special and a unique position in relation to this issue, and I'm happy to get the appropriate minister to meet with him and any colleagues to discuss these issues.
Alison Bennett. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm hoping for the avoidance of doubt that the Justice Secretary can rule out any changes to inquests with the jury which are required when the deceased has been detained by the state. These inquests are also subject to agonising delays for bereaved families. Given those delays, can he set out what plans he has to address backlogs in the coroner's court?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful for the question, and I can rule that out, and happy to have the Minister discuss what we're doing in the coroner's court with her.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I declare an interest as a practising criminal barrister? Before the Justice Secretary tears up clause 39 of Magna Carta, which guaranteed that no free person shall be imprisoned except by the lawful judgment of their peers, I asked him to consider only a few weeks ago I was in the Crown Court in Birmingham where a matter was delayed and adjourned because we didn't have courtroom availability. So eliminating juries will not solve backlogs in the way he described, but it will erode public confidence in the very principles that have protected our justice system for over 800 years. So I accept justice delayed is justice denied, but I'm sure the Minister will also understand justice must not only be done, but must be seen to be done, and that can only be done by juries.
Hear, hear.
Well, I note he accepts that justice delayed is justice denied, but then doesn't come up with a solution. Does he respect Sir Brian Leveson and his work? Does he recognise that it's important that we do reform the system so it's fit for purpose and fit for the next generation? Does he accept, he must accept, as a criminal practitioner, the huge demand and the changes that we've seen in criminal practice since I qualified as a lawyer 30 years ago? Of course he does.
Jim Allister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, having spent my professional life practising in the criminal courts in Northern Ireland, where we have had both jury trials and non-jury trials to deal with terrorist offences, I must say to the Justice Secretary that whatever the intellectual capacity of a judge, they do not have the practical life experience collectively of 12 jurors. And it is that which brings superior credibility to a jury verdict.
Yeah.
So could I suggest to the Justice Secretary that to dissipate juries is to strain the quality of our justice, particularly in circumstances where the presiding judge will have to both decide on the admissibility of evidence and then to put from his mind evidence he might have dismissed when reaching a verdict, and nonetheless convey to the public that justice has been seen to be done.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hugely respectful of the honourable gentleman's experience in these areas. We do ask our judges across a whole range of areas to make life-changing decisions. I'm the father of an adopted daughter. There is no greater decision than you can make, believe me, to take a child away from its birth parents. So judges do have to make difficult judgments, and they do so with the assistance, of course, of those who give evidence before them. So I do believe we can do this, and I just ask him to reflect on that 3-year threshold and the sorts of crimes in which we're asking our magistrate and our judges to make those fine judgments.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The previous government should hang its head in shame for leaving our judicial system, the courts, the black backlog and the prison systems in such disarray. A 2022 survey of 373 legal professionals conducted by barrister Keir Monteith KC and the University of Manchester found 56% of respondents had witnessed at least one judge acting in a racially biased way towards a defendant, while 52% witnessed discrimination in judicial decision-making, concluding that there is institutional racism in our justice system. Given the Justice Secretary now seeks to remove juries, does he foresee greater injustice, prejudice and racial discrimination in our courtrooms? And what steps is he taking to tackle the existing and likely increase in institutional racism?
The Honourable Gentleman knows that the previous Prime Minister David Cameron and Justice Secretary Michael Gove asked me to conduct the Lammy review. And in that review, I did recommend that training, which was not happening in the way it should happen, and it's now happening. I was concerned about the diversity of our judiciary and our magistracy. That has improved, more to do. But say in London, with 31% of our magistrates are now from an ethnic minority background. And of course, it's also important that in the changes that we're making, we will now get the judges' reasoning, which of course lawyers like those on the backbenches can challenge. Where you've got a jury, you don't get the reasoning. And I think that is important as we look at these issues of accountability.
Madam Deputy Speaker.
Point of order, Dr. Kieran Mullen.
Thank you. During the questioning, the Justice Secretary referred to the Victims Commissioner supporting these proposals. I wonder if the Justice Secretary would be able to clarify the record. The Victims Commissioner sadly passed away a number of weeks ago and cannot possibly have seen these proposals. I wonder if the Justice Secretary was referring to the incoming Victims Commissioner who starts in January, but her statement released today makes no reference to the Justice Secretary's proposals on changes to jury trials. And I wonder if he might have inadvertently misled the House or about that.
That is not a point of order for the Chair, but the Secretary of State wants to respond.
Well, just to clarify, I did discuss these proposals with the incoming Victims Commissioner, and today there was a Violence Against Women event held at number 10 with many victims' organisations, and of course with them and with my colleague, the Minister of State, who's in her place, who will make the next statement, there is wide welcome of these proposals.
That concludes the statement. And before we move on to the next statement, I have to notify the House, in accordance with the Royal Assent Act 1967, that the King has signified his royal assent to the following acts: Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Act 2025, Property, Digital Assets, etc. Act 2025, Animal Welfare, Import of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Act 2025, Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Act 2025. We now move to the next statement. I'll just give a few moments for the front benches to swap over. Every time. So, yeah. Statement, Minister Jess Phillips.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the Angelini inquiry. I cannot begin anywhere else than by acknowledging the abhorrent crime that led to the establishment of this important inquiry in the first place. Sarah Everard's murder by a serving police officer was a betrayal of trust so wretched that it defies belief. None of us will ever forget the collective sense of sorrow, outrage and revulsion that swept across the country in the aftermath. There were far-reaching implications for policing and the public's confidence in those who are meant to serve and protect communities. And let us always remember that this began with a young woman losing her life. A beloved daughter, sister and friend gone because of an act of pure evil. Today I am thinking of Sarah and of the years denied to her and of her loved ones. They are in all of our hearts, as are the other victims of violence against women and girls who have lost their lives. As the Justice Secretary said, I've been with some of them this morning, and we hold them, and I'm sure I speak for the House, very closely in our hearts. Part 1 of the Angelini inquiry focused on the career and conduct of Sarah's killer, while Part 2 was commissioned to examine broader issues in relation to policing and the safety of women. The first of 2 reports that will make up Part 2 of the inquiry has been laid before the House and published today. It examines what more can be done to prevent sexually motivated crimes against women in public spaces. The report starkly highlights that many women do not feel safe due to the actions and behaviours of predatory men, and they are assuming the burdens of their own protection themselves through avoidance measures such as not going out at night, avoiding dark streets, and modifying their use of public transport. This is, as we all know, utterly unacceptable. As the inquiry chair, Lady Ailish Angelini, puts it so clearly in the report, somehow we have simply come to accept that many women do not feel safe walking in the streets. This is a substantial and significant report, and I would urge all members to read it in full. And while it acknowledges that there is a range of ongoing work which seeks to prevent these terrible crimes and disrupt predators, it also highlights that there is no quick fix and demands a more consistent approach across the whole of society to address and prevent this violence. I would like at this point to place on record my heartfelt thanks to Lady Eilish and her team for their work. They have approached and continue to approach their task with skill, sensitivity and determination. Today's publication underlines why it is so vital that every agency and every sector does more to protect women from harm. This government is resolute. The fact that women do not feel safe going about their everyday lives is a national emergency. This House will also be aware of our landmark commitment to halve violence against women and girls in a decade, which will require us to address the root causes of abuse and violence and prevent offending and relentlessly pursue those who perpetrate these appalling crimes. Since the general election, we have played a more active role to ensure that women and girls receive more consistent protection from policing. We have provided £13.1 million to deliver a more coordinated approach and national leadership to drive up investigative and operational standards through the National Centre for Violence Against Women and Girls and Public Protection. This new centre is ensuring that expertise, including from programmes such as Operation Soteria and Project Vigilant, are put into practice in forces across the country. These were both highlighted in Lady Angelini's report. We are also clear that those who commit these heinous crimes have absolutely no place in policing. To address this and to help fulfil recommendations from Part 1 of the inquiry, we are putting police vetting standards on a statutory footing, which will enable forces to exclude those with a caution or conviction of vogue offences from policing. We are also strengthening requirements on forces to suspend officers under investigation for these crimes. I know there is a great deal of interest in our up-and-coming VORG strategy, and I have been in number 10 this morning with the Prime Minister and stakeholders working on it today. It will deliver a bold step change in how we address violence against women and girls as a government and a society over the next decade. As the inquiry report highlights, we cannot address entrenched issues in isolation. We must draw on all of society, and I place emphasis on this being a truly cross-government strategy. Prevention is fundamental to our approach. Alongside strengthening our response to target perpetrators and stop them causing harm, Having lived and breathed its development over several months, I am as eager as everyone else to get it out there. It will undoubtedly answer some of the issues raised in this important report. It is on its way very soon, and I am confident it will live up to expectations. As Lady Eilish highlights, too little has been done to deliver consistent protections for women and girls, and progress has fallen short. We find ourselves at a moment of reckoning. As someone who has spent their working life trying to secure real lasting change, I know it will not be easy, but in honour of the victims and their families, and for the sake of women and girls across England and Wales, we must succeed. And this government won't stop until we have. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister, Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for advance sight of her statement and for coming to the House to speak to the incredibly disturbing and damaging issues outlined in today's report. Over 4 years ago, the reprehensible abduction, rape and murder of Sarah Everard shocked us all, and it forced the police to confront their failure to remove Wayne Couzens as a police officer. The crime was vile and abhorrent, extinguishing the life of an incredible young lady in the most awful way. We should never forget the impact of this crime, with Sarah's mother describing the final hours of her life as a constant torment to the family. I know that Sarah, her family and her friends remain in the thoughts of the whole House and people across the country today. This incident underlines our responsibility to confront not only the problems outlined in this case, but also to go beyond any single evil person and tackle challenges in our police and society more widely. Sarah's murder had a profound effect on women. As this report outlines, women changed their travel plans, their routines and their lives out of fear for their safety. I'm sure the whole House will agree that is simply not acceptable. This reflection is critical, as we will always support the police and have advocated the need to give them the powers required to tackle crime in our society. However, that support is predicated on a deep responsibility, which extends beyond the responsibilities to which many in our society are bound. As the Code of Practice for Ethical Policing notes, effective policing is built on public trust and confidence. This depends on a policing profession that is ethical and professional in the way it respects, listens, responds, and improves and serves the public. As the Minister will be aware, the terms of reference for Part 2 were set and published in May 2023 by my right honourable friend and the then Home Secretary, the member for Fareham and Waterlooville. The scope appropriately asked the Government to cover the three broad areas set out by the Minister today: recruitment and vetting, police culture and standards, and the prevention of sexually motivated crimes against women in public spaces. This report highlights our responsibility to ensure women and girls feel safe in public spaces, where there is clearly a significant gap today. The Minister, in her role, rightly mentions some of the steps the Government are taking to tackle violence against women and girls. In this spirit, I recognise the important steps taken by the last Government, which brought forward Operation Soteria, a programme highlighted by Lady Eilish in her statement this morning, which sought to radically transform the way police and the Crown Prosecution Service investigate rape, and which I understand the Government are implementing the principles of in training. This was among a range of other measures set out when the first part was published, but as was acknowledged, we need to go much, much further. Therefore, I hope the Minister can follow through on what she outlined today and ensure that the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy is published, having been delayed over the past year. The Minister's statement today also does not mention the use of data, a point the report suggests is lacking. Can she provide assurances that the Government, in the strategy, will have a comprehensive plan for implementing better data recording, encompassing and publishing a wider array of data pertaining to violence against women and girls? As Shadow Policing Minister, I'd also reflect on what we can do at speed to instil trust within the public that the police will tackle this problem. The dreadful murder of Sarah Everard did huge damage to public trust in the police, especially that of young women. In particular, I refer to the proposals around officer vetting and conduct, which I expect to be raised in the second half of the report. The truth is that for a variety of reasons we can both acknowledge, the measures to bring forward changes to our vetting and dismissal procedures have not been implemented at sufficient speed. As such, will the Minister discuss with her ministerial colleagues the need to implement these changes swiftly once the legislation is passed? The inquiry report demonstrates the necessity of tackling violence against women and girls in our public spaces. Unfortunately, we know there are survivors of grooming gangs who were failed by the police and local authorities, often in plain sight. Therefore, I'd implore the Minister to provide answers about the terms and reference and timings of the grooming gangs inquiry and ensure there is justice for all those affected by these heinous crimes. Additionally, I'd ask the Minister about her level of confidence in implementing the recommendations set out in Lady Eilish Anglioni's report today. As she rightly highlighted, this is a whole society issue, which requires a whole society response. The Minister has herself highlighted some of the challenges in achieving cross-government responses to the violence against women and girls strategy, and I hope she'll now be able to drive forward the change needed to protect women and girls.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman and I thank him both for his tone and genuinely constructive questioning on the matter. The first thing I would say is that absolutely Operation Soteria started under the last government. It was something that I worked alongside ministers at the time on, as well as other police forces. In that spirit, I always welcome that cross-party working. Operation Soteria has, it would seem, been a game-changing, and that is certainly highlighted in Lady Eilish's review. And what it also says is that it needs to have a consistent footing within it. And so us putting it within the new centre, we very much hope will provide some of that consistent footing to very good work started under the last government. I absolutely credit that. On the issue of data, he is absolutely right, and what data we measure, how data needs to be improved will absolutely be part of when a government says that it is going to halve violence against women and girls within a decade. The first time any government has ever tried to put any numbers on it. You can't have numbers unless you have a lot of data that goes into that, and so looking at data will be very important. He highlights the issue that Lady Eilish herself talks about, how it is not fast enough, and actually with the recommendations of the previous report that was laid, those that were for the government are being undertaken. The nature of the 43 police forces is a clear issue throughout the report, and when everybody has read it, that comes out very clearly, which is one of the reasons for having the Violence Against Women and Girls Centre, to try and do some of that. But fundamental reform is also going to be needed with regard to policing and the standards, so that we don't end up with a postcode lottery across our country. Now, the Home Secretary has already announced some reforms around police and crime commissioners, but in the new year, broader policing reforms will be coming, and it is for the exact reason that Lady Eilish outlines, is that postcode lottery across police force. How confident am I? I am always confident that we will undertake as much as is possible. It will never be as fast as I would like it to be, or anyone would like it to be, because this is hard work, and you cannot just change it for good announcements. You have to change the culture, and it's going to take a lot.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And before I start, I'd like to echo the statements made by both the Minister and the Shadow Minister with regards to Sarah Everard's loved ones. Our thoughts are with them today. In order for any victim to come forward, especially those that have experienced gender-based violence or sexual violence, the public must trust the police, especially more than they do currently. The Angelino inquiry found a quarter of police forces lack even basic policies for investigating sexual offences. As trust and transparency hopefully improves and increases, so will the number of reports to the police. Will this impact how the government measures halving violence against women and girls? And will the Minister share progress on vetting to remove police officers who pose a threat to the public?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and obviously it was a manifesto commitment of this government to ensure that there were specialist sexual RASO teams, so sexual rape and sexual assault, within every police force for the exact reason that the Honourable Lady has outlined, that ensuring something exists in every police force is not something actually that is in the gift of the people who get to stand here, because quite rightly of operational independence. However, there is an absolute need for standardisation. We wouldn't allow the same lack of standardisation in terrorism, for example, an exact point that Lady Eilish points out in her review, and yet we allow it in crimes against women. So absolutely that is absolutely fundamental. And of course, I want to see police charging and police reporting increasing. That is not how the measure of whether we are decreasing incidents will be done. Only 10% of victims of violence against women and girls ever talk to the police. It in and of itself would never be a good measure on these grounds. So of course, I want to see that increasing, but that doesn't mean the crime is always going up. It might just mean we're getting better at it.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. All of our thoughts today will be with the family of Sarah Everard. More than 4 years on from her horrific murder, too many women are still suffering life-changing crimes on our streets. This inquiry makes it painfully clear that women continue to feel unsafe. They change their daily routines just to avoid very real threats. That is unacceptable in Britain today. Part 1 of this inquiry showed that Wayne Couzens should never have been allowed to become a police officer. Multiple opportunities to stop a dangerous sexual predator were missed or ignored. As Chair, Lady Eilish Angelini warned that without radical action there is nothing to stop another Couzens operating in plain sight. Today's report underlines just how radical that action must be. The lack of basic data on sexually motivated crimes against women, and the fact that over a quarter of forces still lack fundamental policies for investigating sexual offences, is nothing short of horrifying. The inquiry finds that sexually motivated crimes against women in public are not prioritised to the same extent as other serious offences. We are told that prevention remains just words while perpetrators slip through the cracks. These are shocking findings that shame our nation. So I ask the Minister, will she commit to implementing all 13 of Lady Angelina's recommendations, and will she set out a timeline for their implementation? And I ask the Minister that this government pledge to halve violence against women and girls within a decade, yet this strategy is still not published. Can the Minister reassure us that this manifesto promise will be met, as she has said, and will she tell us today when it will be published? She says soon. I think people will be reassured by a date.
Minister.
Okay, I'll say very soon is the answer to that. Look, what I would say is that I received... when you will get to read, as I have, because I obviously get it sooner, Lady Eilish's full report, one of the things that she particularly criticises is ministers standing up, or the police service standing up after part 1 of the report and saying, yep, we'll just do everything. And then going away and looking and thinking, oh, hang on a bit of this, bit of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give her the respect that she deserves and take away all of the recommendations before I say exactly what I am going to do. What I will say is that when others do get to read the strategy, that actually, and I was interviewed by Lady Eilish as part of this work, as part of this review, that it will answer many of the questions that are in the report. And so I think that actually the timing is awkward, I would say, that had the strategy come out at the point of this, that I would be able to answer the question more fully. And that is like, but I think she deserves the respect of us actually looking at what is possible rather than just going, yep, I'll take them all, and then not being able to deliver on it.
Lawrence Lammy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for this statement and also join colleagues in remarks with regards to Sarah Everard's family. Her mother is quoted in The Guardian saying that she's still tormented by the horror of what her daughter suffered at the hands of Wayne Couzens. I also think of some of the many other victims who suffered at the hands of men and boys, including, as the Minister knows, I've referenced Eliane Andan and Janita Jogby. And when you're confronted and you meet a family that are grieving for the loss of their daughter, sister, mother, friend, there are no words. And especially when you think about the horrific nature in which those women were killed. The extracts from this report that I've read make a really difficult reading, and I know that this is an area that the Minister is really committed to, but for Lady Angelini to say that sexual offenders should be banned from the policing, but yet this hasn't happened. For her to also say that there's a troubling lack of momentum, funding and ambition for prevention of this work is worrying. And as my honourable friend quoted, the chair of the Select Women and Equality Select Committee, a quarter of police forces still haven't implemented the most basic policies on this really key area. It does give troubling reading. One of the other areas which is really troubling and mentioned in the report is the connection between online abuse. It's not just in a physical atmosphere that women are getting abused. What more can the Minister say and shed a light on in terms of how we're really going to tackle down on the disgraceful misogyny and abuse that women face in the online world?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and we owe it to Sarah and Sarah's family and every family in our own constituencies that we have met to make sure that this work actually gets done. And her anger at progress being made. Obviously, this Labour government will legislate and is putting on a statutory footing the issues around vetting and what can and cannot be allowed, and who can and cannot be a police officer, and hopefully that will see some sea change. But I have to say that the idea that there are police forces in the country where without the most basic work being undertaken in this space, and what Lady Angelini finds about numbers, it is inexcusable. I wish to say to every Chief Constable in the country, this is a priority, make it a priority. And I say that from this dispatch box with all the power that I possibly can of the Home Office behind me, to say, of course, the Home Office has a role, and of course, funding on things like prevention is absolutely the responsibility of the government. But the basics of thinking that keeping women safe, where more than half of the population, should be absolutely basic policing.
Sir Keith Batty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I associate myself with the remarks of everybody who's paid tribute to Sarah Everard and her family. I remember where I was when I heard the news, and I know it shook many of my constituents as it shook all of us. Yeah. In the spirit of where the Minister talks about respecting Lady Eilish, and I know she says she's going to go and take a look at it in detail, it's a question about funding, because that's been raised by women's charities. Does she think she's got enough money to do it now? Is she going to need more? And of course, I'm sure we'll support her on that.
Do I think I'll get enough money? Any minister who stands in front of you and says yes is lying. Look, of course I would always want more money, but actually there is fundamental systematic problems in our system that more money won't solve. Actually, there are fundamentals in the culture of organisations, like more police. We have more police now, let's say, than we have done, 100 years ago. It didn't stop this happening. There are absolutely fundamental things that need to change, and I suppose I'm here for a long time, not a good time in this regard. We have to change absolute fundamentals. But the Justice Secretary who was on just before me doing the statement, he today announced the £550 million or £500 million that will increase year on year with the rising rate of inflation. A 3-year settlement for victims funding, for example. Now that level of security and that increasing like that, I was very heartened to hear that. So do I think I will have as much as I'd want? I've never. Do I think I'll have enough and I'll make do with it? Yes, I do.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think all our hearts have been broken by the words of Sarah Everard's family. The honest truth, though, is this report does not happen in a vacuum. This weekend, women in Walthamstow will hold a vigil to reclaim Hollow Ponds, a lovely open space, but there have been repeated concerns about sexual harassment and offences there. I can't tell the Minister whether those concerns are merited because my local police, Waltham Forest Police, have refused an FOI about the number of crime reports or offences at that site, just as they refused an FOI to explain why they were using community protection notices to deal with violence against women offences. I say FOI because they refused to respond to me as a local MP and local women about how they are dealing with violence on our streets and concerns that Lady Angelini reports in this report about street safety. There is a problem with the Metropolitan Police. We've known that for many years and many reports show that. That's why for many years, many of us have been campaigning to make misogyny part of our hate crime rubric because we've seen the difference it has made in police forces and how they approach these issues. The Minister will be aware that it is now nearly 3 years since this House passed the Protection from Sex-Based Harassment legislation to bring those measures into power and finally hold organisations like Waltham Forest Police to account for their disrespect for the safety of women in my community. Can she give my residents some assurance that misogyny as hate crime will be implemented and we will see the cultural change that will tackle the fundamentals that she's talking about?
I thank the Honourable Lady. I only wish that writing things onto the statute books changed the culture. It's been illegal to rape someone for quite some time. It's been illegal to murder for even longer. I only wish that just putting things on the statute books made a difference. I have to say, what I would say to her police force is that I would always encourage good communications, both with the women. Policing is based on consent. And that is something to hold dear in our country. So I absolutely implore them to discuss with my honourable friend and also the local community what concerns they should have and what the police are going to do. I've seen all over the country, and Operation Vigilant, for example, is a really good example that is highlighted. Brilliantly done by Thames Valley Police, that does exactly that, works with the local businesses, local women's groups to do exactly what she is talking about, and I would absolutely implore an Operation Vigilant style thing. Actually, on community protection notices, Eilish Angelini in her review has some interesting things to say about what police should be doing in public spaces using certain orders, so I would ask her to have a look at some of those things. In the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, we will be talking about some of the issues that she has raised here today. But as I have said, that just putting things on the statute book doesn't necessarily mean that operationally that's going to be brilliant. And so my job is to make sure that before I commence anything, that it can actually work in practice.
Sarah Dyke.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I associate myself with the comments from across the House today. My thoughts are indeed with Sarah Everard's family and all of those lives who've been impacted by violence against women and girls. The landmark 2019 study into rural domestic violence found that abuse lasts longer, is more complex and is harder to tackle, while policing response is largely inadequate in rural areas. Years later, the figures don't suggest any significant improvement in outcomes for victims and survivors in rural areas. So at a time when stresses faced by farmers could see victims left trapped in isolated rural communities, how will the refreshed Violence Against Women and Girls strategy improve outcomes for victims in rural areas?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and actually, I am by no, whilst I am an expert in this particular field, I am not an expert on rural communities, and absolutely, the disparity and the need for better buy and for services. We have buy and for services for other sort of underrepresented communities, and I really feel actually, and I'm not the person to do this, and so I implore her to act, that there needs to be a considerable greater lobby around rurality and violence against women and girls, and I am totally here to hear it and to work alongside, because that is absolutely the case. What I must point out, though, is that the idea that stresses faced by a particular community cause violence against women and girls is not something like the vast majority of people who face stresses in their lives, the vast majority of men do not go on to abuse. Violence against women and girls and the causes of it which Lady Eilish points out, there is little prevention, and I very much hope to change that. And that is my main focus. There is very little prevention in that, actually are rooted in something quite different.
Pam Cox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the work of the Angelini inquiry into the appalling murder of Sarah Everard. I also welcome the Minister's update on the government's strategy to halve violence against women and girls over the next decade, and she knows that representatives from 4 select committees met recently to help to do our bit to advance that work, and I'm sure she can be assured of our support with that. Can she give an indication of the kind of implementation and engagement that will follow the publication of the strategy?
I can give an example from this morning. So this morning, with a series of around 60 stakeholders from children's, women and girls, perpetrators, lots of different civil society, business. We were over in Downing Street with the Prime Minister, and it wasn't an event that was about, you know, drinking warm wine and eating nibbles. It was a working event to look at how we actually implement things. I know that people, and you know, it's fair enough to criticise the delay in the strategy. The strategy is a piece of paper. How you actually make it work is much more important to me, and so working with stakeholders and providers, and I welcome genuinely people in this house, just because we wrote something down, what I have learned over the years and felt slightly, if you don't mind me saying, gaslit by, is people telling me the sky is blue, and then every case I handle tells me something else.
Sir Julian Lewis.
The House is rightly united in horror at what happened to Sarah Everard and in sympathy for her family. Returning to the earlier exchange about vetting, which I understand will be coming up in the next stage of the Angelini process, can the Minister tell us whether it will examine the effect of extreme pornography online, of toxic masculinity influencers online, and whether there is any prospect that a vetting process would enable people to be, at the time of recruitment, spotted as people who had watched this stuff and who had indeed commented favourably upon it, even on the dark web.
The Honourable Gentleman makes a very, very key and important point that actually in part 1 of the Angelini inquiry, she made recommendations with regard to police psychological testing prior to recruitment of people based on this exact issue. She also references quite heavily in this report Baroness Burton's review into violent and misogynistic pornography. So it absolutely will be an issue. So the police faithfully said that they would undertake all of the part one of the Angelini, and of course the next stage is looking much more not just at Wayne Couzens and the vetting, but also the case of David Carrick as well, and looking at vetting. But absolutely, undoubtedly, she is already, from her own words, thinking about the psychology in this regard, and it is at the forefront of her mind.
Jen Craft.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to extend my sympathies as well to the family of Sarah Everard. Like many people, I found that my trust in the police service was fundamentally shaken by the events that led up to Sarah Everard's murder. And then it was reinforced later when I saw how badly the vigil was handled or mishandled by the Metropolitan Police, and how women who had gathered just to grieve and show their solidarity and support for Sarah Everard's family were treated, compared to how a football celebration was policed similarly, which was predominantly attended by men. It filled me with rage. It filled me with, it shook my kind of trust and made me question who the police are operating for and whether they take the concerns of women, and particularly women who face violence and sexual abuse, seriously. And since becoming a Member of Parliament, I've heard far too often from my own constituents about how when they have approached the police, particularly with incidents of coercive control, they've felt dismissed and not listened to and not taken seriously. So I would like to ask the Minister if the upcoming Violence Against Women and Girls strategy will look at the root cause of violence against women and girls, which is rampant misogyny in our institutions and in our society.
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady. With regard to her comments on trust in policing, nobody dislikes a bad copper like a good copper, is what I think I would like to say. And I go all over the country and meet, and obviously the ones that I meet are the ones who are doing innovative, brilliant things in their local police forces. That's why I go out and see them. And actually the women who I have worked with, as she is referring to in her own constituency, they don't have any choice but to trust the police. Actually, it's a life and death situation. And so we have to make sure that across the board, the very best thing that we can do to improve trust in policing is make the response to the crimes that she highlights to be good, responsive. We're not going to get what we want in every single case where somebody gets thrown in prison, but we have to make sure our systems do that. That there is options for safety and security for every woman wherever they come forward, and that is what the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy is about.
Trisman Osborne.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I join colleagues from across this House in their thoughts with the family of Sarah Everard, and can also thank the lady for her inquiry and her Part 2 response today. The Public Accounts Committee has recently conducted an inquiry by looking at the National Audit Office report of policing around the country, and we found that there's a total inconsistency across all forces around not only data metrics but also how they deal and interact with such cases. Can I ask the Minister whether she's working really closely with the Policing Minister on the forthcoming policing reform legislation so that we can ensure that there is consistency across all forces so that we can deal with this problem head on and not allow forces to get away with piecemeal and differences across our country?
Absolutely, she's in the office next door to mine, and I mean, I get up in literally everybody's grill, but I'm very welcome in the policing minister's office. Policing reform, the wider sense of policing reform, it has to be, I mean, very, very, very rooted in exactly what we are trying to do around violence against women and girls, because it is endemic of some of the other failings about postcode lotteries across the country. So yeah, I am very heavily involved, and the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy will coalesce with policing reform.
Barwar.
Deputy Speaker, and like many members, my thoughts today are with the family and friends of Sarah Everard. Sexual predators like Wayne Couzens and David Carrick were a disgrace to the police uniform that they purported to wear. And I know many police officers, as the Minister has just said, were as disgusted by those crimes as were members of the public, and believe they should never have been allowed in the police force in the first place. In Rochdale, we're very lucky to have police members of our multi-agency Sunrise team, which does fantastic work in complex safeguarding, not just with victims of grooming, but victims of domestic violence and victims of any kind of sexual assault and crime. And I would recommend other forces to look at Rochdale and see how we've learned and how our forces have actually improved services for women. But what's shocking about this report is not just the 26% it highlights of forces where there are no basic services in terms of investigating sexual assault. It also highlights the severe underfunding of the last government in this area. So I'm proud this government has committed to halve violence against women and girls. And can she reassure me that funding will be there under this government, and also the findings of the report will inform her forthcoming strategy?
Absolutely, the findings of the report will and obviously I speak to Lady Eilish, and what I'm not doing is waiting for her various reports to do things or not, and so I speak to her to make sure that those things are. I can't wait for reports if something absolutely needs to be done. And what I would say with regard to the policing area in Rochdale, I will absolutely look into it and make sure that the new policing centre that we have created for violence against women and girls looks into it. And what I see across the country from areas where police forces may have historically had quite public failings, as with the case of Sarah Everard, the level of learning that has happened in lots of those places it is really, really good to see. And we want to see more. I only wish that we didn't wait for terrible tragedies and total failings before we changed. And so I stand again at this dispatch box and just implore every agency and every police force across the country to literally stretch every muscle to prioritise this issue.
Sam Carling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I hope all of us go away after this discussion and check whether our own police forces are in that 26% who still don't have those basic policies in place, and hopefully seek to address that if it is the case. Madam Deputy Speaker, the statistics in relation to young women as victims of these crimes are particularly shocking, and I just wonder if the Minister could outline a bit more about what we're going to do about that specifically, and whether the upcoming strategy will have any measures in it to combat the rising misogyny among young men.
I don't want to do too many trials on the strategy, but yes. For a very long time, I've spent my career trying to put nicer, better plasters on cuts that didn't get any smaller, and that work is really vitally important. I want to stop the cuts from happening. I don't want to make nicer plasters anymore. I have to look at what is, and some of that means doing things that have never been done before. And actually what Lady Eilish very brilliantly says in this report, she says plenty of other things have been allowed to try and progress things without having to have a completely solid evidence base, whether that's in policing or others. I want that for this.
Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Part 2 of the Angelini inquiry notes that women and girls don't feel safe in public spaces due to the behaviour of predatory men. Does the Minister agree with me that predatory doesn't just mean following or stalking or attempting unwanted physical contact, but also must be expanded to include leering, staring and catcalling? That's also predatory, and it negatively impacts women and girls, as women and girls in my constituency of Rugby have told me. Does she further agree that of course we need more enforcement, but we particularly need better education of boys and men from an early age, and we need them to call out the behaviour of other boys and men, something that the White Ribbon campaign advocates brilliantly?
They certainly do, and as you know, and there won't be a woman sitting in this room today who hasn't experienced this. We have all felt unsafe. Lady Eilish speaks for every single woman in the country when she says this. We have all felt unsafe, and actually in my years of experience, both personally but also working in this field, it isn't the moment of impact that is the most frightening, or the moment that somebody gropes you that is the most frightening. It is the things that lead up to it that leave you scared, that leave you waiting. It is the leering that is frightening, actually. That's more frightening than the fact. And that is the experience of literally every woman in our country at some point or another. So, of course, that we cannot undermine that. And